The most dangerous moment in your life is not when you are strong. It's when people learn who you are while you are broken. The wounded identity is not something you choose. It is something that forms around you when pain lasts too long and no one teaches you how to metabolize it. At first, it is simply survival. You adapt, you soften your voice, you over-explain your intentions, you apologize preemptively, not because you are wrong, but because conflict feels dangerous when you are already carrying too much inside. When people encounter you in this state, they do not just see pain, they learn you. They learn how you react when pushed, how quickly you doubt yourself, how easily you take responsibility for things that were never yours. They begin to associate you with a version of yourself that exists only under pressure, only while bleeding. Over time, this wounded version becomes familiar not just to others, but to you. You begin to organize your personality around what was hurt. Your decisions are filtered through avoidance. Your kindness becomes a strategy. Your silence becomes a shield. And without realizing it, you stop asking who you are and start asking what will keep you safe. This is how an identity is built out of injury. The danger is not the wound itself. The danger is when the wound becomes the reference point for who you believe yourself to be. When pain turns into personality, when survival strategies harden into character traits, you start confusing humility with self-erasure. You mistake patience for powerlessness. You call emotional numbness peace. And others reinforce this version of you, not out of cruelty, but because predictability feels comfortable. When someone knows how you behave while wounded, they feel oriented around you. They know where they stand. They know how much space they can take. The wounded identity is useful to everyone except the one carrying it. It keeps relationships stable but stagnant. It keeps conflict low but resentment high. It keeps you accepted but unseen. And the most subtle trap is this: the wounded identity often looks virtuous. It looks like selflessness. It looks like depth. It looks like being the strong one who endures quietly. But beneath it is a quiet contract. You will remain manageable, and in exchange, you will belong. As long as you stay wounded, you stay legible. The moment you begin to heal, this identity starts to fracture. And healing here does not mean positivity or forgiveness. It means awareness. It means noticing how much of your behavior is driven not by choice, but by fear of reactivating old pain. You begin to see how often you shrink before anyone asks you to, how often you explain yourself to unsafety, how often you confuse being needed with being valued. This awareness is destabilizing, because if the wounded identity is no longer who you are, then who are you? This is where many people stop. They cling to the familiar pain rather than face the unknown self beneath it. The wounded identity, for all its suffering, provides structure. It tells you how to behave. It gives you a role. Letting it dissolve feels like psychological death. But if you continue, something important happens. You realize the wound was never your essence. It was an interruption, a distortion, a chapter that overstayed its purpose. And the traits you thought defined you: over-accommodation, self-doubt, emotional suppression, were never your nature. They were adaptations. As this becomes clear, your behavior begins to change quietly. You pause before agreeing. You speak with less urgency. You stop narrating your pain to be understood, not because you are closed, but because you no longer need external confirmation of your reality. And this is when others begin to feel unsettled, because they are not meeting a healed version of the person they knew. They are meeting someone unfamiliar, someone less predictable, someone whose center is no longer located in the wound. The wounded identity dissolves not with drama, but with discipline, with small refusals, with internal boundaries, with the decision to stop defining yourself by what hurt you. And as that identity loosens its grip, what remains is not hardness, not coldness, but grounded presence that no longer organizes itself around pain, no longer offers access through weakness, no longer negotiates its worth through suffering, and no longer needs to be recognized as wounded in order to exist. Healing didn't make you softer. It made you honest, and honesty is threatening. Shadow awakening does not begin with light. It begins with discomfort. With the moment you realize that the parts of yourself you have spent years denying are not gone. They are simply waiting. Waiting beneath politeness, beneath restraint, beneath the careful, constructed image you learned would keep you safe and accepted. From an early age, you learn which parts of you are allowed, which emotions are praised, which impulses are punished. Anger becomes dangerous. Confidence becomes arrogance. Desire becomes selfishness. So you exile them, not because they are wrong, but because belonging feels more urgent than wholeness. What you push away does not disappear. it adapts. The disowned parts of you move into the background and begin influencing you indirectly. The anger you suppressed leaks out as passive aggression. The ambition you denied shows up as resentment toward those who succeed. The assertiveness you were never allowed to develop turns into chronic self-doubt. The shadow always collects interest. Shadow awakening is the moment you stop pretending these patterns are accidents. It is the realization that what you judge most harshly in others often mirrors what you have refused to acknowledge in yourself. The traits that provoke you, disturb you, or obsess you are rarely random. They are signals, messages from parts of your psyche demanding recognition. This is not a comfortable process when the shadow begins. To surface, it does not arrive politely. It arrives as intrusive thoughts, sudden anger, uncomfortable desire, and impulses that contradict the person you believe yourself to be. Many people misinterpret this moment as regression or moral failure and rush to suppress it again. But suppression is what created the shadow in the first place. Awakening here does not mean indulging every impulse. It means taking responsibility for your inner world without disowning it. It means acknowledging that you are capable of anger, dominance, selfishness, and even cruelty, not to act them out blindly, but to integrate them consciously. Without this integration, you remain fragmented. A divided psyche is an unstable one. The more you deny your shadow, the more it controls you from behind the scenes. You become reactive instead of deliberate, righteous instead of honest, exhausted from maintaining an image that no longer reflects your inner reality. Shadow awakening demands courage because it dismantles the false moral superiority that comes from seeing yourself as only good. It replaces innocence with accountability. You are no longer a victim of your reactions. You are responsible for understanding them. As this awareness deepens, your perception of others changes. You stop idealizing and demonizing. You recognize complexity. You see that people are not simply good or bad, but conscious or unconscious. This shift alone alters how you move through the world. Your boundaries become firmer, not because you are defensive, but because you are no longer afraid of your own intensity. You stop projecting disowned traits onto others. You no longer need enemies to carry what you refuse to hold. This is why shadow awakening often feels isolating. You can no longer participate fully in collective illusions. Gossip loses its appeal. Moral outrage feels hollow. You become more interested in understanding than in judging, more focused on mastery than on approval. There is also grief in this stage. Grief for the years spent suppressing yourself. Grief for the relationships built on incompleteness. Grief for the version of you that believed goodness meant smallness, but with that grief comes power. Not domination, not control, but internal alignment. Your actions begin to match your instincts. Your words carry weight because they are no longer diluted by self-betrayal. You stop apologizing for your presence. Shadow awakening does not make you darker. It makes you real. It gives you access to energy that was previously locked away in repression. Creativity sharpens. Decision-making becomes faster. Your presence gains gravity. And this is where others begin to feel the change, even if they cannot name it. You are no longer easily manipulated by guilt. You are no longer predictable through shame. You are no longer driven by the need to be seen as harmless. You become capable of saying no without explanation, of standing your ground without aggression, of recognizing your capacity for harm and choosing restraint, not out of fear, but out of conscious control. Shadow awakening is not about becoming someone else. It is about reclaiming everything you were forced to abandon in order to survive and learning to carry it without letting it rule you, without splitting yourself in two, without pretending that light can exist without darkness, and without needing to perform purity to prove your worth. People aren't disturbed by your strength. They're disturbed when they can't predict you anymore. Most people are not disturbed by your strength. They are disturbed by the moment they can no longer predict you. Predictability is a form of psychological control. And when someone has learned your patterns, especially during periods when you were wounded, they build expectations around how you will respond, comply, or retreat. Control does not always look like domination. More often it looks like familiarity. Knowing which words make you hesitate. Knowing when guilt will soften you. Knowing that you will explain yourself instead of holding your ground. These small certainties allow others to feel oriented around you, even if they would never admit it. When you begin to change, these certainties collapse. The loss of control is rarely conscious. People do not wake up thinking they want power over you. But when a dynamic has been stable for a long time, any shift is registered as a threat. You are no longer playing the role they learned how to navigate. This is why subtle changes provoke disproportionate reactions. You speak less, and they accuse you of being distant. You hesitate before agreeing, and they say you become selfish. You stop justifying your choices, and they say you've changed. What they are reacting to is not your behavior, but the disappearance of access. Control thrives on emotional transparency. When someone can read you easily, they can influence you easily. When your inner world is on display, it becomes a map others unconsciously use to position themselves. As you become more internally integrated, that map dissolves. You no longer broadcast uncertainty. You no longer outsource decisions for reassurance. You no longer react immediately to pressure. This creates a vacuum. And humans are deeply uncomfortable with vacuums. They rush to fill them with interpretation, accusation, or resistance. Loss of control triggers anxiety because it forces self-confrontation. When someone can no longer manage you, they must manage themselves. And many people have no practice doing that. This is why attempts to regain control often escalate. They test you with old behaviors to see if you'll respond the same way. They provoke you to trigger familiar reactions. They frame your boundaries as betrayals. If you return to your old patterns, the system stabilizes again. But if you hold your ground, something irreversible happens. They realize you are no longer available in the way you once were. This realization can manifest as resentment, withdrawal, or sudden hostility, not because you have done something wrong, but because the unspoken contract has been broken. The version of you they depended on no longer exists. It is important to understand this without turning it into bitterness. The goal is not to villainize others, but to see the dynamic clearly. Control often emerges where fear and dependence intersect. When people rely on you behaving a certain way to feel safe or superior, your growth destabilizes them. The more regulated and self-directed you become, the less leverage exists. This is why self-trust is often misinterpreted as arrogance. When you stop seeking validation, those who provided it lose relevance. When you stop explaining, those who judged lose influence. When you stop negotiating your boundaries, those who cross them lose access. Silence plays a critical role here. Silence removes hooks. It denies others the emotional data they use to steer you. It does not mean withdrawal from connection, but withdrawal from performance. And in that silence, something shifts. Conversations change. Power dynamics recalibrate. You are no longer reacting to maintain harmony. You are responding from clarity. This transition is rarely smooth. Expect confusion. Expect projection. Expect attempts to pull you back into the familiar pattern. These reactions are not signs that you are wrong. They are signs that the system is adjusting. Loss of control terrifies others because it exposes dependency. It reveals who needed you to stay small, compliant, or wounded in order to maintain their sense of order. When that dependency is removed, the imbalance becomes visible. At this stage, restraint is essential. The temptation is to overcorrect, to assert dominance, to prove independence. But true autonomy does not announce itself. It stabilizes quietly. You continue showing up, but differently. You listen without absorbing. You engage without surrendering. You hold your position without hostility. Over time, those who can adapt will recalibrate and meet you at a new level. Those who cannot will drift away, not out of malice, but because the old access point no longer exists, and without it, they do not know how to relate to you, do not know how to feel secure around you, do not know how to maintain their sense of influence, cannot tolerate the uncertainty that comes from interacting with someone who no longer offers their inner world as a point of control. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, certain people started panicking. Silence is often misunderstood as absence, as withdrawal, as weakness. In reality, silence is one of the most concentrated forms of power a person can develop because it removes the primary resource others use to influence, provoke, and control you. Access to your inner world. When you are wounded, you speak more than you should. You explain yourself. You narrate your pain. You try to be understood because understanding feels like safety. Words become a bridge you keep extending outward, hoping someone will meet you there. But words also make you legible. Every explanation reveals priorities. Every justification exposes doubt. Every emotional reaction provides information. Silence begins when you realize that not every thought needs an audience, and not every emotion needs to be translated. This realization does not come from indifference. It comes from integration. As you become more internally aligned, the urge to externalize weakens. You no longer need to convince others of your intentions. You no longer need agreement to move forward. You begin to trust your own internal compass. This is where silence becomes power. Power does not shout. Power stabilizes. It holds position. It does not rush to fill space or correct misinterpretation. When you stop reacting immediately, you interrupt the feedback loop others rely on to steer you. Many forms of manipulation depend on urgency. Pressure depends on speed. Guilt depends on response. Silence dissolves all three. When you pause instead of answering, people project. They reveal their expectations, their anxieties, their need for reassurance. Silence turns the spotlight outward. It allows you to observe without being pulled into performance. This is why silence makes people uncomfortable. It removes their leverage. Those accustomed to emotional access may accuse you of being cold. Those who relied on your explanations may accuse you of being evasive. But what they are experiencing is the collapse of familiarity. The version of you they understood is no longer available. Silence does not mean disengagement. It means selectivity. You speak when there is alignment, not compulsion. You respond when it serves clarity, not when it serves anxiety. This shift changes how others interact with you. Conversations slow down. Words carry more weight. When you do speak, it lands because it is not diluted by constant output. Silence also protects you from premature self-betrayal. When you speak too soon, you often negotiate against yourself. You soften boundaries. You reveal uncertainty before you have processed it. Silence gives you time to feel fully, think clearly, and decide deliberately, internally. Silence creates space. Without the pressure to perform coherence for others, your thoughts organize themselves. Emotions settle. Intuition becomes audible. This internal quiet is not emptiness, it is depth. Silence as power requires discipline. The impulse to explain does not disappear overnight. It arises from old conditioning, from the belief that being understood is necessary for belonging. Choosing silence means tolerating misunderstanding without rushing to correct it. That tolerance is strength. As you practice silence, something subtle happens. You begin to notice who respects it and who resists it. Those who are secure adjust. They ask clear questions. They meet you with presence. Those who depended on your openness become agitated. They push. They test. They attempt to provoke reaction. Silence reveals character. It also forces alignment. Without constant verbal cushioning, relationships must rest on reality rather than reassurance. You stop managing emotions for others. You stop smoothing discomfort preemptively. This does not make you unkind. It makes you honest. Silence is not passive. It is an active choice to conserve energy, protect clarity, and maintain internal authority. It is the refusal to leak power through unnecessary disclosure. In time, your silence changes the dynamic entirely. People listen more closely. They choose their words with care. The space around you feels different, less chaotic, more grounded. And perhaps most importantly, silence reconnects you to yourself. Without the noise of constant expression, you feel your own weight again. You inhabit your body. You sense your boundaries. You stop looking outward for cues on how to be. Silence as power is not about disappearing. It is about becoming so anchored internally that your presence alone communicates more than your words ever did. Your restraint speaks of self-trust, that your pauses signal sovereignty, that your stillness commands attention without demanding it, and that your quiet no longer asks to be interpreted but stands complete, self-contained, unmoved by the need to be seen. Every real transformation costs you relationships, and that's how you know it's real. Integration is not a ceremony. It is not a declaration. It is not a moment of epiphany that you can post about or explain in a single sentence. Integration is a meticulous, often brutal confrontation with yourself, a confrontation that forces you to reconcile all the parts of you that you have denied, suppressed, or exiled. It asks you to take responsibility not just for your actions, but for the impulses, desires, and tendencies you have long ignored. And the cost of this process is higher than most are willing to pay. From the beginning, integration challenges comfort. The familiar patterns that once protected you from judgment or pain now feel like chains. The relationships that survived on your predictability begin to feel hollow. Those who thrived when you were weak or malleable may resist your transformation. Integration dismantles illusions, both internal and external, and it leaves a vacuum where safety once existed. The first cost is clarity at the expense of security. As you examine your shadow, your contradictions, your hidden impulses, you begin to see yourself unfiltered, and seeing yourself in totality is destabilizing. Parts of you that were convenient to ignore: anger, selfishness, envy, desire, fear come into focus. You cannot dismiss them as anomalies or bad habits anymore. You must acknowledge them as integral to who you are, and that acknowledgement is uncomfortable. The second cost is the loss of performative relationships. Many people only engage with the version of you that is incomplete, that conforms to their expectations. When you integrate, you stop performing the roles others have assigned to you. You stop seeking approval through accommodation or explanation. You stop bending to avoid conflict. This shift, while necessary, inevitably alienates those who depend on your incompleteness for their sense of balance or superiority. Some may attempt to pull you back into the old dynamic. Others will quietly drift away, unwilling or unable to meet you in a new reality. Integration also exacts a psychological cost, the death of familiar identities. The self you have cultivated to navigate trauma, the self who survived by shrinking, apologizing, and compensating must dissolve. That version of you feels safe. It is recognizable. Its loss triggers grief, confusion, and sometimes panic. Letting go of who you were requires you to inhabit someone unfamiliar, someone untested, someone who commands their own presence rather than negotiating for acceptance. Emotionally, the cost is intensity. As you integrate, feelings long buried resurface. Anger that was repressed becomes vivid. Shame and regret demand acknowledgement. Desire emerges in forms that challenge old boundaries. These emotions are not inherently destructive, but they are powerful and disorienting if you are unprepared. The process requires endurance, the ability to feel fully without being overwhelmed, the capacity to witness your own depth without fleeing or numbing, and the discipline to act in alignment with clarity rather than reaction. Socially, integration shifts your gravity. You stop being predictable. You no longer respond as expected. You no longer defer to consensus for validation. Those who were comfortable with your previous malleability may resent or fear the new balance. Authority that was implicit in your submission now resides within you. People notice. Some admire, some envy, some attempt to destabilize you. Maintaining integrity in these circumstances is itself a demanding exercise in patience and resilience. Integration carries a moral cost as well. It requires ruthless honesty, which often conflicts with social niceties. You cannot hide behind politeness, strategic silence, or socially acceptable performance. You must choose alignment over ease, truth over comfort. This can create tension in personal and professional relationships, and it demands courage to remain consistent when external forces challenge your authenticity. Financial or practical costs may arise indirectly. As your identity and priorities shift, opportunities that were previously convenient may no longer suit your values or long-term vision. Careers, friendships, and lifestyle choices must be reevaluated. Integration requires adaptability, the willingness to risk loss, and the patience to rebuild in alignment with who you are becoming. Perhaps the most profound cost is solitude. The process of integration isolates you in ways that are necessary but painful. The internal work is private. Understanding and navigating your shadow, your impulses, your unacknowledged desires cannot be outsourced. The inner authority you cultivate often makes superficial companionship less satisfying. You may feel loneliness not because you lack people, but because the people who remain cannot fully resonate with the depth you now carry. And yet, within every cost lies the seed of power. Integration is expensive because it delivers what few experiences can: mastery over yourself. The ability to act without unconscious compromise, to stand firm without fear of judgment, to hold your presence without requiring permission. The price is high because the reward is rare, and the alignment it brings is not granted lightly by the world or by your psyche. Integration demands vigilance. It demands endurance. It demands courage because it forces you to confront every comfortable illusion you have built, every escape you have relied on, every dependence you have allowed to define you. It requires discipline to maintain the clarity you achieve and to resist falling back into patterns that provided temporary safety but limited true growth. In facing these costs, you discover something undeniable: that the self you integrate is not weaker, not fragile, not subject to control in the ways it once was. It is grounded, aware, resilient, and internally sovereign. And every boundary you uphold, every truth you speak without apology, every restraint you exercise consciously is a testament to the price paid and the power earned.